So, Mathemalchemy, or how a bunch of us spent the last 2 years. And here's that bunch. So it's a group of 24. Some of you are here. Some of them are here. Many of them have been to previous gatherings or maybe here remotely. Mathematicians, engineers, artists interested in math. And this is what we built. This is an art installation that we call Mathemalchemy. It's an alchemy of many, many different ingredients at many different levels. So it all started really 2.5 years ago. At a meeting on Cape Cod, I saw in an art gallery there this work of art, this installation. It's called Time to Break Free. And I was absolutely bowled over. I mean, by the imagination and all the craftsmanship that went into it. It was so many levels. It's the story of a quilt that is, you see, it's attached to a chain on the bottom left, and it's breaking free. The chain is just broken, and it gets pulled into this big steampunk machine that processes it, and you see fabrics and so on. And out come the characters that were on the quilt as fully shaped, 3D, confident people. Critters stepping forward, persons and critters stepping forward in the world. And even the boundary of the quilt has become a big aura. So I thought this was fantastic. And I did something that's very uncharacteristic. Well, I looked up the author, and I found that she was on Facebook. And then I did something that was very uncharacteristic for me. I mean, I've maybe done it 3 times in my life. I sent her an email on Messenger because I saw no other way of contacting her. And I had this vision of maybe commissioning her to build something that would use that fantastic imagination and craftsmanship for a big collaboration. And my idea was, I said, look, you had this quilt that was being transformed. I said, I want to make mathematics visual. We could imagine people discovering primes. Here you have 2 critters. I made 2 critters. And they, from that, people find properties of prime numbers, and that becomes mathematical theorems, and then they lead to applications. So this was a very early vision, and for those of you involved in Mathemalchemy, there's so little of that vision that survives, and that's one of the great things about Mathemalchemy. We alchemized and we built something together that was very different and englobed all of us, and some of the little things survived. So as bait for Dominique, I knew of people who are wonderful in that they are great craftsmen and artistic, and they are mathematicians, and they make beautiful and fantastically crafted mathematical objects. And so I sent her books, and I pointed her to websites of Carolyn Yackel and her Tamari Bowles, and of Diana Tamina and her hyperbolic crochet, and the beadwork of Susan Goldstein. And I sent them the books by Carolyn and by Dinah and by Carolyn. And she said, sure, let's try. She says, I was never very good at mathematics. Well, we've heard that many times before. But she was game. And and I had a little bit of money to pay her for the time she was spending on preparing. And for the next 4 months, we talked weekly over Skype. Remember Skype? There was a time that we Skyped and didn't Zoom. So we talked over Skype, and she put that into concrete objects, because that's the way she thinks. And I actually, as I was preparing this talk, I remembered that I actually explained the Kakeya set to her, and that never made it into the installation. But we talked about so many things, and she made a little maquette. Here we are at the JMM in 2020, a little over 2 years ago, and we presented this. So this was the vision. If she was game, I thought we would build this first concept, and we would present it. And we would see whether we could sign up a team. And we presented, and then I had other talks to give, but Dominique was there with her little maquette, and Robert Vathauer very generously gave her a little space next to the exhibit, and so she was there and enrolled some more people than had been at the presentation. And this little maquette, it doesn't exist anymore because it has gone on to some of the pieces have gone on to other lives, but I still have a little video of it, and people were very intrigued by it. It came into a little suitcase. In fact, Dominique and I had never met before the JMM. I mean, we had talked on Skype a lot, but we met there, and we shared a room, and we became fast friends. These people signed up there at the JMM. And then some of them said, but I know of these and these other people who would love to be part of it, but they're not at this JMM. Can they also? We said, sure. And I also wanted to involve some other people, and we contacted some more, and the team rounded out. And these are the 24 people. This is the bunch that I showed you. So what did we do? Well, I promised them, if we have a team, then I will look for funding, because doing something collaborative like that, and I did. And Dorothy Buck from Duke University had some money from when she was in England from the Leverhulme Trust. The Simons Foundation was very generous, and we were going to get together and do this on workshops. We were going to have a conceptual workshop where we would all together and discuss a lot and so on, and make something in cardboard, and then we were going to fabricate at home and then bring these things together, and we were going to build it, and it would be all over in August, September in 2020. And instead, of course, this arrived. So we had our hotels booked, we had airlines, we had everything, and we held our workshop anyway on Zoom. So, and actually, I was a little bit hesitant because trying to do something, but several of the group, I remember Carolyn saying, oh, thanks heaven that you're doing this. I mean, because there were so many things that were being postponed because they were impossible, but we were going to find a way. So we held our workshop on Zoom, and we talked a lot. And there's a video, actually, documentary that was made, and one of the participants, Liz Paley, says, there was a lot of Zoom. So yes, over the next few months, we first met weekly, and then bi-weekly, and then once we started fabricating, only monthly. But in the beginning, we met weekly, and there were intermediate meetings of little subgroups where we hammered out concepts, stories, components, all kinds of things. And so here you see, I took some snapshots occasionally, and we recorded some of the meetings, and we met and we discussed, and we explained concepts and ideas to each other, and we sometimes were skeptical. Sometimes we laughed a lot. And the thing became more and more complex. The whole installation is certainly twice as complex, probably more, than we originally imagined, because we had so much more time all of a sudden. I mean, the whole pandemic, I mean, you know how long it lasted. And we had all these creative people who were invested in it, and we became a little community. I mean, for me, it was a fantastic thing, because we all had difficult moments, and we were all sitting isolated in our little prisons, but that creativity we had zillions of Zoom meetings, not just for Mathemalchemy, but my husband said, I can always tell when it's a Mathemalchemy meeting. He says, you sound 3 times more excited and enthusiastic, he says. And so we laughed together, we mourned together, we celebrated together. We demoed things to each other. Here, Carolyn is demoing a Tamari ball, and the visions on a ball that's going to become a Tamari ball. Here I'm demoing an embroidery. Here, Kathy is showing how the head will go on the baker. And we had fantastic conversations. I mean, sentences like, everybody was remarking on it. What motivates the chipmunks to search for devisors? And of course the tortoise has to take her lunch along when she sets out for a walk. Arnold's tail really should be covered in netting for hygienic reasons in the bakery. Let me go weigh my chickens. That was Liz Paley. She had little ceramic chickens, and we were asking how much they weighed. and we made puns. We made so many puns. I mean, the nautical scene, we have a scene with a boat and a bay, became the nautical scene. And of course, there were lots of knots then all over the place. And in fact, whatever good idea, we came up with many more ideas than were realized, but every idea that we really liked, if we could find a way to put it in there, it went in there. So it is an enormous collection of things, and we fabricated. So once we had the concept hammered out, we were so in love with making it so on that Dominique had to put her foot down and said, now we have to fabricate. We freeze it. I mean, of course, little things snuck in again, but we froze and we started fabricating. And this is the GIF that we sent to everybody a year after the workshop. So showing what everybody was involved in and what things that had been fabricated and so on. And this was only the beginning. So we fabricated, we did 3D printing. Here you have something that became a sculpture in the park of Mathemalchemy and buoys on a net of the boat. We had beading. I mean, in the bay we have these beautiful starfish, and this is the Conway knot beaded by Susan Goldstein. We had ceramic critters. I mean, all the critters with one exception in Mathemalchemy are in ceramics made by Liz Paley. We had crochet, both critters and these beautiful hyperbolic surfaces by Dai Tamina. We had embroidery, and I'll come back to that. We had knitting. Knitting, Tess the tortoise was knitted, but then here you have this wallpaper, wallpaper with wallpaper groups. I mean, we had laser cut things. We had steel welding, and this was a fantastic design by Sabeta Matsumoto, in which you know, when you weld steel, steel doesn't like to do some things, and that's why you weld it in place and you hold it and the welding and so on. This is designed so that, in fact, all the pieces fit together beautifully. All the bending is done. I mean, it's done by making a nice differential geometric analysis of the surfaces that underpin it. And so people who had welded it said it was the easiest thing ever to weld because it had been designed the surfaces had been designed appropriately. This is the one critter that is not, this is needle felted. Dominique's daughter liked the whole project so much, and she's a needle felter, that she made us a little mouse as an extra. Origami. We had, what else? Oh, painting. So on top of we have a beautiful mural. This mural is actually self-referential because the octopus is painting the mural. I mean, and the graffiti are fluid equations. And then there's all kinds of other things. I mean, there was polymer clay in which we impressed designs. This design actually was first 3D printed. Henry Segerman, I designed it, and then Henry Segerman made the design to have it 3D printed. We 3D printed it, and then we used that as a mold to impress on the polymer clay, and that went then in the bakery. That was the oven door. We had quilting and other sewing. We had glasswork, we had tamari balls, we had weaving, metalwork, wire bending, and then woodwork of different types. So many different things that were used. And they all come in this installation. I've forgotten one element, light. I mean, because you saw the glass dodecahedron, which is in the top of the lighthouse. And then on top of the lighthouse, you have a beautiful 3D printed design by Henry Segerman that is used for a stereoscopic projection on top of the ceiling. So it's now on exhibit. It has started its career as a traveling exhibit. We assembled it mostly in July last year. Remember, there was this 3 weeks where we thought it was over. Well, Well, those 3 weeks were exactly the period that we put it together. We thought it was over. We were still very careful, but at Duke we could, for those 3 weeks, we were allowed to take off our masks, and then masks came back on. But we put it together. Nobody ever got ill from the contacts we had with the COVID case because of those contacts during our workshops. And then final touches were made to it. We had to have a test case, because if you build an installation that you hope will be standing in places, in venues for months to come, you better be sure that after 2 months things don't start kind of wilting. So we had a test space at Duke where it was standing. The test space wasn't high enough, so we had to take ceiling tiles away so that the lighthouse could so Henry was a bit chagrined that when he came to look, you actually had to look inside the ceiling to see his stereoscopic projection. But of course, in real venues, that's no longer the case. So we tested out, we added some more elements, we refined our website, which is still not completely done, we're still a work in progress. But, and we had a party, a goodbye party for it in December, and then it was all packed up, and it's gone now. It's standing in Washington, D.C. right now, in the flagship building of the National Academy of Sciences, where it's only visible 1 day a week because of their ongoing COVID restrictions. It's a working building, so they don't want to have a whole lot of people come through. But it's going later to other institutions. We're booked full until certainly the end of 23 and maybe spring 24. If spring 24 falls through, then it might come to Gathering for Gardner. I mean. Anyway, so we have a map, and you see all these different scenes. There will be an article in the AMS Notices soon that explains what is going on in a whimsical way, as it fits this whole whimsical construction, where you see Arnold the cat and Harriet the bowerbird, who is the owner of the curio shop, because people say that magpies like shiny things, but in fact that's a mistake. I mean, it's bowerbirds that like shiny things, so she had to be a bowerbird. And we didn't want to have long panels with explanations, because there's so much to explain if you want to have the explanations. Not everybody may want them. People may just like to marvel in what they see. And so people can take a self-guided tour with their smartphones. And let me tell you now a little bit about different components. So there are many different scenes. So the whole installation is, as I said, layered. So we wanted to make the fun, the beauty, the creativity, the joy of mathematics visible. Many different things. Not just one concept, as many as we could think of illustrating. So there are many different components, and if I go back to the map here, you have a little downtown area where there's a lighthouse and a bakery and a curio shop. And on top of the curio shop, there's a terrace where people can eat the pastries they bought in the pastry. You have a walk here, which we'll visit a little later, where Tortoise Tess is going for her exercise. You have a huge mountain here, which we call Integral Hill. It's Integral Hill because it illustrates a surface that you might want to integrate. And it consists of two parts. It consists of horizontal levels, the Lebesgue terraces, and columns, which are like basalt columns, which are the Riemann cliffs, of course. We have a playground here where chipmunks, we'll see them later, are discovering prime numbers. So you remember I showed you these two little mice were discovering prime numbers? We'll see them there, but they become chipmunks and they do it completely differently. And there's no longer one that is happy with all the divisors it finds and another one that's chagrined because 13 has no divisors. They're both excited because 12 is a special number. It has all its divisors. And 13 is special. It has no divisors. I mean, and that was something that actually, so things changed in the whole discussion. And then there is an enormous quilt that has a beautiful, on one side, a beautiful illustration of cryptography. You remember that little blue cryptographic thing that struck Dominique, and so she made a quilt about cryptography together with mathematicians on the team who knew a lot about different uses of cryptography. And on the other side of the quilt, we have an homage to women mathematicians, but not through maybe famous theorems and so on, but through their doodling, their playfulness. We are illustrating tiles from Marjorie Rice. We're still illustrating the doodles that Maria Mirzakhani drew on these huge sheets when she was doing her math, where she shows and she says, oh, if you do this, then you're done. And then she wrote below it, if you're lucky. And we have doodle Sonia Kovalevskaya apparently had on her notebooks would write formulas, and then when she was she made a mistake, she biffed it through, and then she would doodle little drawings about them. So we have illustrated those. We have drawings by Gladys West, who was the person who was it NASA or maybe at the Navy, who developed the mathematics to really make a good enough model of the Earth that's still being used for GPS, as a recent article in the MS Illustrated. We have this beautiful The Great Doodle page. And then if you walk further, you have a scene with Eratosthenes' sieve, and we'll visit that again. And then you come at the bay where, well, the nautical bay, of course, where there are all these knots swimming around and nautical things happening. So for all of these, there are many different layers. I mean, there's the story in this magical world with these critters living their life and doing things that might be a little different from what critters usually do in children's books. But, and that we call the Through the Looking Glass story. And we make little videos of those, and I'll show you a few. And then we have, of course, mathematical explanations. So people who want to explore the math can do that. I mean, but they opt to go for that or not. And then people who are interested in how was all this made, how was all this fabricated, all these different techniques, can find those details as well. So, and that is something that people then can access through their smartphones. And that is ready, but we're now building it also to have it ready for a more normal website. Okay, so let me show you the Through the Looking Glass story for Tortoise, for which we have actually a little movie. So I hope that will work. Oh, there should be music with it. I don't know. that is a first story that you already can see on the website. I mean, if you go, I'll give you the website again later. If you go to the website, you can find stories and so on, and that story is on there already. But then mathematical connections. Well, you saw already how many, I mean, there are. And we paid a lot of attention to detail. For instance, on Zeno's path, so there are all these segments of shorter duration, of shorter length, of half the length of the previous one. But each one of them has 14 pavers. The pavers just become smaller. And they actually, originally they became smaller by exactly a factor in area of 2. But we had to adjust a little bit for the realities, and so now it's not quite that anymore. But the Sierpinski, so I mean, there's a connection there. I learned through this project that the first person who actually thought of tetrahedral kites, and even already made a design where you had a tetrahedron and smaller tetrahedral in it, was Alexander Graham Bell. I mean, he wrote a paper on that in National Geographic. I mean, I had no idea. I knew him from telephone, but fabrication details. Well, I think you already heard it for those of you who went to that gathering, Kim Roth, who knitted Tess, and Jessica Sklar, who came up with the idea for that story, told you some about that. But we actually have some beautiful pictures where Tess is naked without her shell. But so we saw that movie. The bakery is another scene. The bakery. Well, let me show you the looking glass, and then we'll come back to it. So we have another movie here. This is not yet on the website. So this is we're going to have little movies like that about every one of the scenes, but only a few are up yet. So let me go for this one. So that was Through the Looking Glass. The whole story of the bakery started with the idea that, and which is something that I know several of you have also observed, that cookie cutters are really very sillily designed. I mean, you roll out your dough, you've made this nice dough, and then you cut your cookies. And then you have all this interstitial dough. And in order to, you have to assemble it again and roll it out again. Well, that's work, but okay, that's so. But the problem is that every time you do that, you absorb more flour. And the dough you make after, the cookies you make at the end of your baking, which have been rolled out 5 times like that, are not as fine as the first ones because they have this much more flour, the proportions have changed. So it's much better to have something where the cookie design would tile. And you have none of this interstitial. You have something at the border because you don't manage to roll it out, but that you roll out twice and you're done. And so I had designed some time ago for Pi Day, a design for pie that kind of fit nicely together to make pie cookies that tile. And so tiling was something that we wanted to illustrate. But once you think of tiling, you think of other tiling. So the floor of the bakery is one of Marjorie Rice's pentagon tilings. You think of tilings, you think of symmetry. So we're thinking of mathematical connections, symmetry. Then Susan said, oh my God, symmetries we can illustrate on a wall as wallpaper, some of the wallpaper groups. And she actually made this design and she knitted it. I mean, these are not all the wallpaper groups, there are only 9 of them, because knitting is something that lends itself well to reflections with respect to a vertical axis, but not really to horizontal reflections. I mean, glide translations are easy too. So there are 9 of the 17 wallpaper groups that fit nicely, that you can knit nicely like that. And she knitted. I mean, this took hours and hours and hours. I mean, it just, the mind boggles. I mean, we're talking, and she double knitted it. So the other side is special too, is the negative of the front. And here you see it as a wallpaper in the bakery, in the movie that you just saw. Actually, incidentally, that's only 9 of the, it didn't work for us to only have 9 of them. Could we have the other ones too? Sure. I mean, 3 of the remaining 8 are things that have 90-degree rotation worked into them. Well, that you cannot do well with knitting, but you can with cross-stitching. So actually, we have them, and you didn't see them in the bakery, but right next to the bakery is the curio stop, which we called Conway's Curios, because we did that as a tribute to John Conway, who passed away during our whole fabrication. And actually, the Conway store was the Conway's Curios was the very first of all our items that was finished. And Edmund Harris, who made the woodworking, took a picture of it with lots of little beautiful things in it, like Conway's office used to be. I mean, for any of you who ever saw Conway's office, they were full of a panoply of magical and interesting geometrical shapes. And it was shown at the memorial. That big photograph was shown at the memorial for Conway held in Princeton. So Conway's Curios has outside of it a little mat that has one of the wallpaper groups, the one that we just had here on the right. And upstairs on the terrace, you have the other 2 little mats. Well, that still gives only 9 plus 3 is 12. What were the remaining 5? Well, they had 30 or 60 degree rotation, or 60 or 120 degree rotation in it. So they became part of a design of a luxury object, a quilt that's being offered in Conway's Curios, that is pieced together, and beautifully a wall hanging that's quilted there. And in the story, because there's also a narrative, the little movie that will come over the curio store, Harriet will say, well, I hope I will get customers today. Maybe somebody will buy this big price item. I would hate to see it go. It really, I like it, and so on. So in the bakery, so I started telling you about things in the bakery. So everything was about tiling and geometry and symmetry. And then, well, once you're thinking of tiling and so on, you're thinking also of well, on the one hand, fractals come in. On the other hand, dynamical systems. So the picture on the wall, the one with the that the baker is going to reproduce in a cake, is a picture that is a very much painterly version of a design that Thurston made about train tracks I mean, on surfaces of negative curvature, you have places where geodesics can come close together and stay together and then go off in completely different directions, and he called them train tracks, because that's what train tracks do in stations. And so a grad student of Gabais in Princeton actually made a drawing in which she made this much more painterly with train tracks and so on, and she was willing to let us use it for the bakery. And then, why is the baker a cat? Well, once you talk about dynamical system, Vladimir Arnold comes to mind, and Arnold had Arnold's cat. So of course the baker had to be a cat, and he's called Arnold. And Arnold was famous for many things, for being curmudgeon too. I don't think he would have liked being the cat at the bakery. But there's a theorem called KAM theory, whole development, Kolmogorov-Arnold Moser. And so his assistant, if you have a cat, you have to have a mouse. And so assistant is mouse, or Mose for Moser. And actually you didn't see it yet because we have to make an update of the movie, but there's also a bag of flour that's called KAM flour and in the bakery. So once we thought of a cat, people said, what about Schrödinger's cat? Well, he doesn't really fit in this geometry and so on. But so that's why he's a very famous cat. And he gave bowls to Arnold when Arnold opened his bakery. And so that's why you have the Schrödinger equation at the rim of the... So there's whatever we could think of, we put in. So I'm going to finish with just some views of other scenes. I mean, I could go on for stories forever. Here you have the chipmunks. You see, they actually are holding up tiles in cuneiform. I mean, because numbers go back a long way, where they are sorting them in composite and primes. And they have these acorns, and they lay them out in rows, and then when it doesn't come out evenly, they put a little bracelet around it. I mean, to show that there's a remainder. And so on the 13th side, you have bracelets everywhere. On the 12th side, only when you try with divide in 5. There's a scene where Tassos, the librarian, because that's the way you abbreviate Eratosthenes in Greek, explains it's an annual ritual where they bring out sieves and they shield, they're transparent, and they shield colors. And he's explaining, he's squirrel-splaining that 30 is already covered a lot of times because, and so the sieve for 7 is coming, and in the next one you see that a further sieve of 11 is arriving. And of course, since the number only goes to 100, he'll have some explaining to do also about how that sieve for 11 doesn't change anything anymore because we're only looking up to 100. You have a boat at which the herons are pulling up a net that's full of knots, because in this nautical bay, the fishes that swim around are special knots. Here you have a close-up of the lighthouse, in which the lighthouse keepers are just changing guards. I mean, the new ones are coming in and the other ones. You see also in the background, and on both, there are 3 silhouettes in 3 figures that live at a different layer than the whole installation. So the whole installation is these critters with all their magical things and all their mathematical visualization. The 3 silhouettes are a way, some human figures on which the viewer can project themselves if they don't see themselves as a chipmunk. I mean, I would have no problem with that, but I mean, I was told that not everybody likes thinking of themselves as a chipmunk or a puffin. And the adult silhouette, so there are 3. There's a little girl blowing her horn, and in the horn, which has a mute, turbulent flow is generated, and so you see these vortices. You have a teenager who's built her own rocket board, and she's surfing over those vortices, which of course is not possible. And then you have an adult mathematician, and from her hands, lots of sheets with lots of mathematical ideas swirl around. And the adult mathematician is actually, for me, a real metaphor of how Dominique's perception of mathematics changed during this whole work, because the first construction she had was an adult which was kind of stiff. She was puzzled, but very stiff. I mean, she had some hip little boots, but and she became this very flowing, very natural, very enthusiastic person. I mean, and Dominique told me, yes, she sees mathematics completely differently, and that's one thing we hope to achieve with this piece, this installation, that it will give a completely different perception to, for instance, the crafters interested in the fabrication, and their children, and here, another view, we have the little girl sitting on a stack of books. We had a long discussion and votes about what books. And so there's some books that are fundamental books, Euclid's Elements, for instance, but also books from from China and in Sanskrit that had old mathematical observations. And then we have some books that really, of which the titles really work well. I mean, On Symmetry, The Beauty of Geometry. I mean, and then we have some books that have a lot of mathematical ideas in them, even if people don't, or even the author himself or herself didn't think of it as mathematics. On weaving. I mean, weaving has lots of math in it. So and again, it's a jumble. We never wanted to be seen as authorities trying to say this, and this. I mean, we always we steered each other away from that whenever one of us had the inclination to want to do that. You have these beautiful arches of the Maury balls. I mean, we have two arches, one where the diameters are decreasing geometrically, and so of course it converges, and then where they decrease as a power. And we go a little higher than the harmonic series because we would have to make too many balls if we had done the harmonic. So I think we take minus 2/3 instead of minus 1 as a power. But of course that will be infinite. But of course it plunges into the sea, and then you don't see it below the waves anymore. So we tell kids who come to see it that it will go on and on and on. It will go through the Earth and out of the Earth and out of the planetary system and out of the Milky Way, and I mean, it makes it concrete in a way that when you write a diverging series doesn't quite the same. Yes, here are those balls again. So we have converging, diverging. We have some balls are decorated, some not. Well, you see here the two arches start at the same ball in the center, and then the next ball are the same diameter, and then they start already changing. The third ball is decorated in both. Actually, it's the same number, the third and the fifth, and the seventh, not the ninth, so it's not the odd numbers. The 11th and the 13th, yes, not the 15th. 7 and 19, yes, not 21. By now you all know that I'm talking about primes. But the 23rd one is not. 29 and 31, yes. And then you notice that all the others come nicely in pairs. It's twin primes. Also, it made fewer balls for us to stitch. How are they stitched? They're stitched differently. Well, they follow the symmetries of the different Catalan solids. I mean, fortunately, it worked out that we could do it with the Catalan solids. And so there's so many things in that one component that are illustrated. And you can find so much more, and you can all find it at mathemalchemy.org, which is, as I said, is acquiring more stuff, so you should check it soon, and again later again. And that's it for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. That was amazing. Looks like we have a question.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Wonderful talk. And I wonder if you can talk to two quick points about this, because it looks like a lot of work went into this, and I'm wondering how to get the maximum benefit out of it. So two questions are, one, can you talk a little bit into how hard would it be to replicate this, and maybe instead of having one installation of this, I can imagine 20 of them around the country, and how hard would that be? And the second piece is, how hard would it be to produce roadmap, because some of these concepts are more for older people and some of them are approachable for younger people. So if there was the ability to sort of have a first grader go in and see the things that are first grade appropriate, and the sixth graders have things that are sixth grade appropriate. So I just think those two things would help get this more widely visible. Thank you.
So, thank you for those questions. So, first of all, be my guest. I mean, I would welcome to see it replicated. I mean, we were willing to tell you everything about how it was done, and in fact, a lot of that material is already available. It is a lot of work. I mean, we were all enthusiastic about it and all sitting at home and using this as a way to find some joy in periods that weren't very joyful. So Dominique estimated at first that it would take between 2,000 to 3,000 hours of people work, and she now thinks it's about twice as much because we put in so much more. So I don't think it's something that you can undertake unless you have a group of people. But it's the whole alchemy of all these different ideas together that makes, I think, it's this extra layer of joy. We, in the mathematical connections, we take it apart in little bits. And so people, I think, we don't have a roadmap like that, but I think people can look at what they understand and what they don't. Also, we don't explain things in full. We give just enough references, and often to Wikipedia, that people then can find more if they want to. Because we think this can be a wonderful tool for people explaining to smaller, or for people discovering themselves, but we want them to do the discovering. We don't want to pre-chew it and for people who don't want to see all that math, we want to show them all the beautiful stuff that's there. So.
Great.
We also have, it's going to be a traveling exhibit, and it will be accompanied by activity kits. So, which the venue then has to get the materials for, but they can do activities with kids of many different levels, or adults for that matter.
I think we have some offside questions.
So it's fantastic. It's great. It's to use the number 14. It's like the mathematical equivalent of the 14 stations of the cross. It's the thing. But the thing you say is, I hope that students will take something away from this, or we think this is going to happen. My suggestion is to put some effort into getting some empirical evidence as to how inspiring this project will end up being. It would be really great to know how much have you really communicated to people who don't understand, who are seeing this for the first time, as opposed to those of us who have been around this melange of a incredible number of ideas for our entire lives.
Thank you for that, and it's something that absolutely we should do. So we have talked about this, but you reinforced this week, which had come to the back burner for me, of having a questionnaire and trying to follow up. I mean, there's one student actually who is coming to visit Duke in a week because she's been admitted to Duke, and she says, I absolutely want to talk to you. She says, I saw this thing on the website. I says, and I may come to Duke because of it. And I had to tell her it was no longer a Duke. But so yeah, it is spreading. And I should make room for the next person. Sorry.
Another quick, thank you, Ingrid.